The day my father died, my husband made a phone call he thought I'd never find out about. Pausa. He was wrong. My name is Claire Whitmore, and I need you to stay with me for this one because what happened to me, inside my own marriage, inside the life I thought I'd built, it still makes my hands shake when I think about it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. It was a Tuesday in late October when I got the call from a number I didn't recognize. I was sitting in my office at the Hartwell Financial Group in downtown Cincinnati, 3rd floor. Glass walls, the kind of place where everyone can see you, but no one really looks. I remember the rain. I always remember the rain. The voice on the other end was calm. Too calm. Miss Whitmore, this is Dr. Aldis from Mercy General in Ashford. I'm calling regarding your father, Gerald Whitmore. I'm so sorry to tell you this. I don't remember what he said after that. I just remember setting the phone face down on my desk, very slowly, and staring out at the gray Cincinnati skyline until my assistant knocked on the glass and mouthed, "Are you okay?" I was not okay. My father, Gerald Whitmore, the man who had raised me alone after my mother walked out when I was 6, the man who had built everything he had from a single hardware store in Ashford, Virginia, was gone. Just like that. 67 years old. And I hadn't spoken to him in almost 8 months. That guilt. God, that guilt. You don't know guilt until you're standing in a cemetery in a town you ran away from, wearing a black coat that still smells like your old apartment, realizing the last conversation you had with your father ended with you saying, "I'll call you next week," and you never did. I had reasons, of course. My husband, Marcus, had always had a complicated relationship with my father. That's the polite way to say it. Marcus Reed, tall, charming, the kind of man who could walk into a room and make every person in it feel like they were the most important one there. I had married him 5 years earlier in a vineyard in Charlottesville, surrounded by white roses and people who told me I was the luckiest woman alive. I believed them. For a long time, I believed them. But Marcus had never liked Ashford. He called it a town that forgot to keep up. He called my father a sweet old man who didn't understand how the real world worked. He always said it with a smile. That's the thing about Marcus. Everything came with a smile. The will reading was scheduled for 3 days after the funeral, at the offices of a man named Theodore Calloway, my father's attorney, who had handled his affairs for over 20 years. I drove up to Ashford alone. Marcus had stayed back in Cincinnati. "Baby, I have the Donovan pitch on Thursday," he said, kissing my forehead at the door. "You know I'd be there if I could. You understand, right?" I nodded. I understood a lot of things about Marcus by then. Most of them I hadn't let myself say out loud yet. Theodore Calloway was a small man with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of stillness that only comes from decades of delivering news that changes people's lives. He shook my hand, offered me water, and then slid a manila envelope across the desk. "Your father updated this 11 months ago," Theodore said. He was very deliberate about it, very specific. My father had left me everything. The house on Birchwood Lane, the one I grew up in, the one with the wraparound porch and the oak tree in the backyard where he'd hung a tire swing for me when I was 5. The 3 commercial properties he'd quietly acquired over the years on the east side of Ashford. His investment accounts, his savings, everything. Total estimated value, $4,200,000. I sat in that chair and I could not breathe. I had not known. I want you to understand that. My father was a man who drove a 12-year-old pickup truck and bought his jeans at Walmart. He didn't look like a man who had quietly, methodically built a $4 million estate over 40 years. But he had. Because Gerald Whitmore was exactly the kind of man who worked in silence and let the results speak for themselves. And sitting in that office, reading through the pages of that will, I started crying, not because of the money, but because I finally understood something. My father had spent his whole life building something safe for me, even when I wasn't calling. When I was too busy with Marcus's dinner parties, career, and his version of our life to drive 3 hours to Ashford and sit on that porch with him. He never stopped. I called Marcus from the parking lot. "Baby," I said, my voice still breaking. He left me everything. The house, the properties, all of it. Theodore said it's worth over $4 million. There was a pause on the other end of the line. And then Marcus said, and I remember this exactly, 4 million? Claire, that's incredible. Listen, when do you think you'll be back? We should sit down and talk about next steps. I should have heard it right then. I should have heard everything in those 2 words. But grief does something to you. It blurs the edges. It makes you want to lean into the warm thing, even if the warm thing is slowly burning you. So I said, I'll be home Thursday. And I went back inside to finish the paperwork. What I didn't know what I had absolutely no idea about was that Marcus had already made 3 phone calls before I even got back to the car. I wouldn't find out about those calls until 6 weeks later. And when I did, everything changed. Before we go to chapter 2, I just want to say thank you for being here. If this story is already pulling at something in you, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps more people find this channel. And if you're new here, subscribe. I tell more stories, and you do not want to miss what happens next in this one. Drop a comment and tell me where are you watching from and what time it is. And if you've ever trusted someone completely, only to find out they saw you as a transaction, let me know. You are not alone. I stayed in Ashford for 2 more days after the will reading. I told myself it was to sort through paperwork, to walk through the house on Birchwood Lane one more time, to sit with Theodore Calloway and understand what came next legally. But honestly, I just couldn't go home yet. There's something about your childhood home after a parent dies. It becomes both the saddest and the safest place in the world at the same time. Every corner holds something, a memory, a smell, a sound that lives only in that house and nowhere else on earth. I sat on my father's porch the night before I left, wrapped in his old green cardigan, drinking coffee I didn't need, staring out at Birchwood Lane in the dark. The oak tree was still there. The tire swing was gone. It had rotted away years ago, but the rope marks were still on the branch. 2 pale grooves worn into the bark by years of a little girl swinging as high as she could, convinced she could touch the clouds if she just tried hard enough. My father used to stand right there at the edge of the porch and watch me. "Higher, Daddy! Push me higher!" And he always did. Every single time. I drove back to Cincinnati on a Thursday morning with the windows down and the heat on one of those strange October contradictions, where the air is cold, but the sun is warm and you can't quite decide which one to believe. Marcus was home when I arrived. He met me at the door, pulled me into a hug that lasted exactly long enough to feel sincere, and then led me into the kitchen where he'd ordered Thai food from my favorite restaurant on Delwood Avenue. "Sit," he said. "Eat. You look exhausted." I sat. I ate. And I watched him across the table, this man I had shared a bed with for 5 years, whose last name I had taken, whose future I had folded my own future into, and I felt something I hadn't felt before. Distance. Not the kind that comes from a fight or a cold silence, the quiet kind. 4 days later, I had gone back to Ashford for the weekend to begin sorting through my father's belongings, something I needed to do alone, slowly, without Marcus hovering with opinions about what to keep and what to sell. I left on a Friday afternoon. I forgot my laptop charger. I know, it sounds so small, so ordinary. But I turned around 40 minutes outside of Cincinnati, came back to the house, let myself in quietly. Marcus's car was in the driveway, so I didn't want to disturb whatever call or meeting he had going on, and I went upstairs to our home office to grab the charger from behind my desk. The office door was half open, and I could hear Marcus on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I want to be clear about that. I was not standing in a hallway trying to catch my husband in something. I was just a woman who forgot her charger. But then I heard him say a name. "Derek, listen to me. The estate is worth at least 4 million, probably more once the properties are assessed properly." I stopped. Derek was Marcus's older brother, a real estate attorney based in Atlanta, the kind of man who wore expensive watches and talked about everything in terms of what it was worth. I had never liked Derek. I had always smiled anyway. "She doesn't know what she's doing with it." Marcus continued, his voice lower now, more careful. "She's emotional right now, grieving. That's the window, Derek. That's when we move." The window. I stood in that hallway and felt the floor shift beneath me. Not metaphorically. I mean, I actually reached out and put my hand on the wall to steady myself. If we can get her to agree to put it all in a joint trust before she lawyers up properly, yeah, exactly. Calloway is just a small-town attorney. He's not going to catch it until it's too late. I stood there and I listened to my husband map out, in calm and specific terms, exactly how he intended to use my grief as a door and walk right through it into my father's life's work. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough. I walked back downstairs quietly. I got in my car. I drove to Ashford. And I did not say a single word. Here is what I want you to understand about that drive. I had cried over my father. I had cried in Theodore Calloway's office, and on the porch, and into that green cardigan at 3 in the morning. But this made me cold. Because I suddenly understood something I hadn't let myself understand before. Marcus had never loved me the way I loved him. He had loved what I represented. My stability, my salary, my family connections, and now, my inheritance. I had been an asset to him from the very beginning. I spent that weekend in Ashford doing 2 things. 1, I went through my father's house the way you go through something sacred, carefully, reverently. I found old photographs and handwritten receipts and a coffee tin on the top shelf of his bedroom closet with $3,000 in cash and a sticky note in his handwriting that said, "For Claire emergencies only." I held that tin for a long time. 2, I called my cousin, Nora Whitmore. Nora was a family law attorney in Richmond, Virginia, sharp and methodical. We had grown up together. She was the first person I told. I sat on my father's porch in the dark, and I told her everything. There was a long silence on the other end. And then Nora said, very quietly, "Claire, do not sign anything. Do not move any assets. Do not let him know you heard that call. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said. "Good," she said, "because we're going to handle this. But we have to do it right." I went home to Cincinnati on Sunday evening. I kissed Marcus on the cheek. I told him I was doing better. I made dinner. I watched him across the table with that same careful, quiet distance, and this time I let myself look. Really look. And I saw it everywhere once I knew what to look for. The way he steered conversations about the estate toward our future. The way he casually mentioned Derek's name once, twice, watching my face for a reaction. The way he left a document on the kitchen counter, almost accidentally, almost a pamphlet about joint trusts and estate planning. He was not as subtle as he thought he was. And I was not as broken as he needed me to be. Over the next 2 weeks, while Marcus thought I was grieving quietly and obediently, I was doing something else entirely. Nora had connected me with a senior estate attorney in Richmond, a woman named Patricia Lund, who had 30 years of experience and the kind of reputation that made opposing counsel nervous before she even spoke. Patricia reviewed my father's will. She reviewed the structure of our marriage finances. And then, she told me something that made my stomach drop all over again. "Claire," she said, "your husband has already contacted Derek twice this week. Derek has been quietly reaching out to a real estate firm in Richmond about your father's commercial properties. They haven't made a formal move yet, but they're positioning. They're positioning." I asked her how she knew. She smiled. I could hear it through the phone. "Because I know every attorney in this state who touches estate property. And because Derek Fallon made the mistake of calling someone who used to work for me." I went home that night and cooked Marcus's favorite meal. Roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, a bottle of Pinot Noir from the rack he was so proud of. He sat across from me and smiled that smile, warm, easy, the smile that had made me fall in love with him in a vineyard in Charlottesville, and said, "You seem better, baby. More like yourself." "I am," I said. And I meant it. Just not the way he thought. There is a particular kind of strength that comes from knowing something someone else doesn't know you know. It is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits inside you, still and solid, like a stone at the bottom of a deep river. The water moves over it. The current rushes past it. But the stone doesn't move. That was me for the next 3 weeks. Still, solid, watching. And Marcus had absolutely no idea. He started bringing up the estate more casually now. That's how I knew the pressure was building on his end. When Marcus wanted something, he had a pattern. He'd circle it slowly at first, mentioning it in passing, planting small seeds in conversation, letting them sit. Then gradually the circles got tighter and tighter until he'd maneuvered you right to the center of what he wanted, without you ever feeling like you'd been led there. "Have you thought any more about the properties in Ashford?" he asked one morning over coffee, not looking up from his phone. Casual. Effortless. Derek mentioned there might be some real tax advantages to restructuring how they're held. Just something to think about. I wrapped both hands around my mug. I said. Maybe. I'm still figuring things out. He nodded. Smiled. What Marcus didn't know was that Patricia had already begun building a wall around my father's estate that he would never be able to climb over. She had filed the necessary probate paperwork in Ashford County, establishing me as the sole beneficiary and executor of Gerald Whitmore's estate with zero ambiguity. She had reviewed every clause in our prenuptial agreement. Yes, we had one, something Marcus had pushed for early in our engagement and that I had signed without fully understanding the implications, which Patricia noted with a raised eyebrow and a quiet, "We'll come back to this." She had also quietly introduced me to a financial forensics specialist named Raymond Cole, a soft-spoken man in his 60s. Raymond spent 2 weeks going through our joint accounts. What he found made Nora curse out loud when I told her. Over the past 14 months, before my father even died, before any of this began, Marcus had been quietly moving money. Small amounts at first. Transfers that looked like ordinary expenses. A payment here, a vendor charge there. The kind of thing that blurs into the background of a busy financial life, unless someone is specifically looking for it. Raymond was specifically looking for it. Approximately -$3,000. Raymond told me, sliding a printed summary across the table in Patricia's Richmond office. Moved in increments small enough to avoid automatic flags. I stared at that number. $63,000. How long has this been happening? I asked. Raymond looked at me over his glasses. Based on the patterns, I'd estimate he started about 4 months after your wedding. I drove back to Cincinnati that night in complete silence. No music, no podcasts, nothing. Just the dark highway and the hum of the engine and the slow, methodical unraveling of everything I had believed my life to be. 5 years. For 5 years, I had worked and built and contributed and loved genuinely, completely loved, while Marcus had been quietly treating our marriage like a long-term investment strategy. I thought about the vineyard in Charlottesville, the white roses, the people who told me I was the luckiest woman alive. I wondered how many of them knew. I wondered if he had known, even then standing at that altar with that smile, exactly what he was doing. Nora flew into Cincinnati the following Friday. I picked her up from the airport and we drove straight to a coffee shop on the east side of the city, far enough from our neighborhood that there was no chance of running into anyone Marcus knew. We sat in a corner booth for 3 hours with our laptops and our notes and 2 pots of very strong coffee. Nora spread everything out on the table between us. The estate documents, Raymond's financial summary, the prenuptial agreement, a timeline she had constructed of Marcus's contact with Derek, cross-referenced with the dates of the financial transfers. She looked at it all for a long moment. Then she looked at me. "Claire," she said, "this man has been running a long con." I already knew it, but hearing it out loud, in Nora's voice, Nora, who had known me since we were 7 years old, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I pressed my fingers against the edge of the table. "What do I do?" I asked. Nora leaned forward. "We let him make his move," she said. "We let him think it's working. And then when he's fully committed, when he's exposed, we take it all apart. Publicly, legally, permanently. And the estate? He will never touch a single dollar of your father's money," she said. "I promise you that." The move came on a Wednesday evening in late November. Marcus had made a dinner reservation at Aurelius, the kind of Cincinnati restaurant that exists specifically for conversations people want to feel important. He ordered wine I didn't ask for. He talked about work, about a project in Atlanta, about Derek's new office. And then, over the main course, he reached into his jacket pocket and slid a document across the table. "I had Derek put this together," he said, his voice easy, warm, the most careful version of himself. It's just a joint estate trust. Combines everything cleanly: your inheritance, our existing assets. It's actually really smart from a tax perspective. Patricia would probably say the same thing. He smiled. He used Patricia's name. He knew about Patricia. My heart was hammering, but my face was completely still. I looked down at the document. It was 17 pages long, dense, with language that sounded protective and was designed to be anything but. I picked it up. I turned it over slowly, like I was reading it. And then I set it back down and looked at Marcus across the candlelight. "Can I take this home and look it over?" I said. "Of course," he said. "Take all the time you need." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "And I thought you have made one fatal mistake, Marcus. You forgot that I grew up with a man who worked in silence and let the results speak for themselves." I took the document home. I photographed every page. I sent it to Patricia at 11 o'clock that night. Her response came back in under 40 minutes. 3 words. "This is it." There is a moment, and I think everyone who has ever been truly wronged knows this moment when the fear disappears. Not gradually. Not in stages. All at once. Like a light switching off. 1 second you are afraid of what happens next, afraid of the confrontation, afraid of standing in the rubble of a life you built and having to decide what to do with the pieces. And then suddenly you are not afraid anymore. You are ready. That moment came for me on a Monday morning in early December, sitting at my kitchen table in Cincinnati with a cup of coffee going cold beside me, watching Marcus button his jacket in the hallway mirror before work. He caught my eye in the reflection. Smiled. "Don't forget Derek's coming into town Thursday," he said. "I thought maybe we could all have dinner. Talk through that trust document, make it feel less formal." "Sure," I said. "Thursday sounds perfect." He kissed my forehead and walked out the door. And I picked up my phone and called Nora. "Thursday," I said. "Okay," she said back. "But first, let me tell you what happened in the 3 days before it, because that is where the real work was done." Patricia filed a formal legal response to the joint trust document Marcus had presented at Aurelius. The response outlined in precise, devastating legal language 17 specific clauses within the document that constituted attempted fraudulent acquisition of inherited assets. She attached Raymond's financial forensics report as an exhibit. She included the timeline of Marcus's communications with Derek. She included the traced transfers, all $63,000 of them, every transaction, every date, every amount. She also filed a petition with the Ashford County Probate Court, formally sealing my father's estate against any third-party claims, a protective measure that, once granted, would make it legally impossible for Marcus or Derek or anyone connected to them to touch a single asset. Wednesday night, I cooked dinner. I set the table. I opened a bottle of wine, not from Marcus's precious rack, but from a case my father had kept in his cellar. A bottle of Virginian red that he had been saving for what he called the right occasion. I figured this qualified. I poured myself a glass, and I sat at that kitchen table, and I looked around at the apartment Marcus and I had shared for 4 years, the art he had chosen, the furniture he had selected, the life he had curated, and I felt almost peaceful, almost tender in a strange way, because I didn't hate Marcus. I want to be clear about that. Hatred would have been easier, in some ways, cleaner. What I felt was something more complicated, a sadness for the woman I had been trusting and wide open, and so convinced that love was enough of a reason to stop paying attention, and a deep, quiet gratitude to the version of myself that had finally started listening. "Higher, Daddy, push me higher." He always did, and so would I. Thursday arrived the way important days always do, looking completely ordinary from the outside. Gray December sky, the smell of coffee, Marcus in the kitchen making toast, talking about traffic on I-75, asking if I wanted him to make a reservation at Aurelius again or try somewhere new. "Let's do Aurelius," I said. "It feels right." He agreed. We drove separately. Marcus said he had a meeting that might run late. I said that was fine. I arrived first. I was already seated when Marcus walked in with Derek at 7:15. Derek was exactly as I remembered him, broad-shouldered, expensive watch, the kind of handshake that tries to establish dominance before a word is spoken. He embraced me warmly at the table. "Claire," he said, "I am so sorry about Gerald. He was a good man." "He was," I said. "The best." We ordered drinks. We made small talk. Marcus was relaxed, comfortable, even. He reached over and touched my hand twice. Solicitous, careful, playing the role of the loving, supportive husband guiding his grieving wife through a complicated process. He had been very good at it for a long time. And then, at 7:43, the door of Aurelius opened, and Nora walked in, followed by Patricia and Raymond Cole. I watched Marcus's face. I will remember that face for the rest of my life. The way his expression didn't collapse all at once, it shifted, in layers, like watching a building settle before it falls. The smile, first, it didn't disappear. It just became confused, misaligned, no longer connected to what was behind his eyes. Then, the eyes themselves, something moving through them fast. A calculation, a reassessment, a dawning comprehension arriving 3 weeks too late. Derek saw it differently. Derek's instinct was immediate. He straightened in his chair and reached for his jacket, the way men like him reach for their armor when they feel exposed. Nora sat down across from Marcus. Patricia sat down across from Derek. Raymond placed his briefcase on the floor beside him and folded his hands on the table. And I looked at my husband across the candlelight of the restaurant where he had tried to hand me a fraudulent document disguised as care, and I said, very calmly, "I know everything, Marcus." He tried. I'll give him that. Marcus Reed was not a man who collapsed easily. He started with confusion. "What is this? Claire, what's going on?" The voice warm and bewildered, performing disorientation for the benefit of the other diners, the nearby tables, anyone who might be watching. Then, when Nora slid Raymond's financial report across the table, the full report, $63,000 itemized across 4 years of marriage, he tried dismissal. "This is ridiculous. Whoever you are, these are routine transfers, business expenses. I can explain every single—" "Mr. Reed," Patricia said, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who has spent 30 years not raising it and not needing to. The Ashford County Probate Court issued a protective seal on the Whitmore estate yesterday afternoon. Any attempt to claim, restructure, or access those assets by any party other than Claire Whitmore is now a matter of civil and potentially criminal liability. She slid her own document across the table. Additionally, the financial transfers documented in this report have been referred to a forensic accounting firm retained by my office. If you'd like to discuss the findings, I'd suggest doing so with your own attorney present. Derek had stopped talking entirely. He was reading the document in front of him with the expression of a man doing rapid mental arithmetic and not liking any of the numbers. Marcus looked at me. Just at me. The performance was gone now. The warmth, the calculation, the careful architecture of the man he had decided to be in our marriage, all of it stripped away. What was left was just a man sitting across from a woman he had underestimated. "Claire," he said, and his voice was different now, quieter. Almost, and this is the part I hadn't expected, almost small. "We can talk about this. Just the two of us. We don't need—" "We're done talking," I said. "My father built something extraordinary," I said. Quietly, without anyone watching, without anyone's help. He drove a 12-year-old pickup truck, and he never once told me what he was building because he didn't need the credit. He just needed me to be okay. I paused. "You looked at everything he built, and you saw a transaction. You looked at me, and you saw an asset." I leaned forward slightly. "But I am my father's daughter." The divorce proceedings began the following month. Patricia and Nora handled everything with the kind of precision that made Derek's attorney visibly uncomfortable in every single meeting. The financial transfers were prosecuted as marital fraud. Marcus settled quietly, quickly, and the terms were not generous to him. I moved back to Ashford in February. I unlocked the front door with the key. Theodore Calloway had returned to me the original key, and I stepped inside. I stood in the hallway of my father's house, and I cried. Not from grief, not from anger, from something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was. Relief. And beneath the relief, something bright and solid and entirely mine. Purpose. I am still in Ashford. I have been here for months now and I do not plan to leave. I hired a local property manager to help me manage my father's commercial properties. We have renovated 2 of them. The third is becoming something I'm still figuring out, but that's okay. If you made it all the way to the end of Claire's story, thank you. Genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Stories like this one exist because people like you show up, stay, and listen. And that means everything. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, or angry on Claire's behalf, or hopeful by the end, please hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second and it helps more people find this channel who need to hear stories like this one. If you're not subscribed yet, please subscribe. I tell stories just like this every single week. Stories about strength, betrayal, resilience, and the kind of quiet power that changes everything. And I want to ask you something in the comments. Is there someone in your life, past or present, who underestimated you? Who looked at everything you were and only saw what they could take? Tell me about it below, because you deserve to be heard. And this community will listen. One more thing. If you loved Claire's story, I think you'll love the next one even more. You do not want to miss it. I'll see you there.